The wind howled over Dry Hollow like a wounded beast that winter. Snow lay thick over the dusty trails, burying wagon ruts and cattle tracks alike. The sky, pale and heavy, promised more to come. Folks in town moved quieter this time of year, hats pulled low, coats buttoned to the neck, and conversations cut short by breath that turned to frost in the air. But up on the ridge, in the grandest house in 3 counties, the fire crackled warm behind stained glass windows. Colton Manor. A symbol of power. A monument to wealth. Inside, dogs barked eagerly at their morning meal, slabs of bone-in beef tossed into silver bowls. Just beyond the kitchen, through the side hall and down 2 creaking steps, was a locked storeroom. Damp. Windowless. And behind that door, a boy. 10-year-old Elijah sat cross-legged on the frozen wooden floor, his bony fingers curled around a chipped tin cup filled with lukewarm water. His lips were pale. His cheeks hollow. He hadn't eaten since yesterday, not properly. A crust of bread. Maybe half. He was mute. Born without speech. But his eyes, sharp, gray, and trembling, had learned to speak pain fluently. No one in town had seen Elijah for months. That was by design. His stepfather, Horace Van Colton, had told everyone the boy had been sent to a fine boarding school in New York. A necessity, he said with a cold smile. A place for boys like him. Sensitive. Fragile. It was a lie. Elijah had never left the property. Since his mother died, fell from a horse under suspicious silence, he had become invisible inside his own home. A shadow Horace wanted hidden. Horace Van Colton, a self-made magnate in the luxury goods trade, ran his estate like a business deal. Every choice had a cost. Every smile a purpose. And Elijah, in his eyes, was a debt he never meant to inherit. So he fed the boy less and less. Meanwhile, Horace's prized hunting dogs, 3 monstrous beasts named Nero, Duke, and Jasper, dined daily on liver and lamb. He said it built discipline. That the boy needed to learn the difference between value and burden. That morning, as snow lashed against the stone walls, Horace sipped black coffee from a porcelain cup and stared out across his land. He didn't hear the soft cough echoing from the locked room below. Didn't hear the scrape of a small spoon against metal. Didn't care. But someone did. Out in the back field, inside a half-collapsed barn, an old white horse lifted its head. Its name was Echo. Once a proud warhorse from the northern campaigns, now cast aside. Echo's back had grown crooked. Its legs stiff from age. Horace kept him only because the townsfolk loved him. To get rid of Echo would raise too many questions. Each night, Elijah crept from the cold and into Echo's stall. And the old horse would lower its head, letting the boy rest beside him. Sharing body heat. Breath for breath. Silent companionship in a house of ghosts. They were 2 souls forgotten by the world. And as that bitter morning dragged on, and Elijah's eyes grew glassy with fever, Echo stomped his hoof once. Then again. Then 3 times. Nobody came. But Echo had begun to understand. Something was terribly wrong. And he would not wait forever. Elijah's body felt heavier than the cold itself. His fingers had gone numb hours ago. His breath came in short, rasping clouds that barely stirred the air. He curled tighter against the wooden floor, pressing his knees to his chest, the way he used to when his mother held him. But there were no arms now. No lullabies. Just the distant barking of dogs and the ache of being forgotten. The fever had taken root. He tried to sit up. Failed. The room spun. From the cracked vent above, a draft sliced through like a knife, rattling the tin bucket beside him. He reached for it, barely able to grip, and knocked it over. Water spilled and quickly turned to slush near the wall. He lay still, heart pounding in silence. Then, for a moment, he imagined something warm, the soft muzzle of a friend, the flick of a tail, the low snort of breath against his cheek. Echo. Out in the field, the white horse paced. The barn was quiet except for the whistle of wind slipping through broken boards. Echo's ears twitched. Something was wrong. The boy hadn't come last night. Nor the night before. And Echo had waited. But now, the scent of worry filled his lungs. He remembered the boy's touch, light, careful, like someone afraid to break what little good was left in the world. He remembered the scraps Elijah brought, stolen bits of potato or dried fruit, always shared without hesitation. Echo had watched the boy grow thinner, watched his shoulders slump more each night. And now, nothing. The silence screamed. With a sudden stomp, Echo threw his head and stepped back from the stall. Old bones be damned. He pushed at the gate once. Twice. On the third try, it creaked open. The snow outside was deep, but he pushed through it, chest first, hooves steady, until he stood looking up at the main house, its windows dark on the lower floor where the boy was kept. The door was closed. Locked. Always. So Echo did the only thing he could. He ran. In town, the church bell rang for noon. Pastor Willard, a man in his 60s with a kind face and weathered hands, was shoveling snow from the chapel steps when he saw the horse coming. A white blur in the storm. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light. Then Echo galloped right into the square, mane whipping like a banner, hooves sending slush flying. He stopped in front of the church, snorting loudly, pawing at the ground. He turned. Stomped. Whinnied. People stared. Mrs. Greaves from the bakery peeked through her window. The blacksmith's apprentice leaned on his hammer. Even Sheriff Harlan, sipping coffee in the saloon doorway, squinted. "What's gotten into that horse?" someone murmured. But Pastor Willard didn't hesitate. He dropped the shovel and stepped forward. Because he had seen that horse before. He had known Elijah's mother, sweet Clara, before she married Horace Van Colton. He had baptized Elijah in this very chapel. He had wondered why the boy hadn't written. Why his letters to the boarding school were returned unopened. Echo snorted again, stamping toward the pastor, then turning his head sharply in the direction of Colton Manor. Willard's heart sank. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Back at the house, Horace was admiring a new shipment of gold-stitched saddles imported from Spain when his butler interrupted. "Sir," he said nervously, "you may want to come to the porch." Horace sighed. "Can it wait?" "There's a gathering. And a horse." "Your horse." "Echo." Horace's eyes narrowed. He stepped outside, and froze. Echo was trotting back toward the house, flanked by a dozen townspeople, Pastor Willard at the lead. "What's the meaning of this?" Horace barked. Willard looked him dead in the eye. "We'd like to see the boy." "What boy?" "Elijah." Horace gave a half-smile. "He's away at school." Echo whinnied. Loud. Sharp. Accusing. And everyone heard it. Horace Van Colton had always believed in control. He controlled the mines. The rail lines. The water rights. He controlled the town bank, the post office board, and 3 out of the 5 county judges. He thought he controlled the truth. But that illusion cracked like ice under boot when Pastor Willard stepped forward and said, loud enough for the whole yard to hear, "Then you won't mind us searching the house." Horace's nostrils flared. "You have no right." Sheriff Harlan, who'd arrived minutes earlier after being waved down by townsfolk, stepped forward and set his hand calmly on the grip of his revolver. "Maybe not. But I have probable cause. That horse just led half the town here, and he don't usually make house calls. Are you going to take the word of a horse?" Horace snapped. Echo let out a sharp, almost human-sounding snort. Sheriff Harlan didn't flinch. "That horse is worth more to this town than you are right now, Horace. Step aside." The gathered crowd held its breath. Horace hesitated for half a second too long. Then, sensing the tide turning, he stepped back. The search began. Room by room. Closet by closet. Horace tried to keep them upstairs, offering to show old letters, report cards, anything to back his story. But Echo had other plans. The old horse pawed at the earth, then trotted around the side of the house toward the servants' entrance. He stopped at a small wooden door, half-sunken, weather-stained, padlocked tight. He stomped. Once. Twice. 3 times. Harlan raised a brow. "What's behind that door, Horace?" "Storage," Horace muttered. Pastor Willard stepped forward. "Then unlock it." "No." Harlan drew his gun. "Then I will." And with the butt of the revolver, he shattered the lock clean off. The smell hit them first. Musty. Sour. Something rotting beneath the surface. Harlan swung the door open. Inside, barely visible in the gloom, lay a curled figure, small, thin, unmoving. "Elijah," Pastor Willard whispered. They rushed in. He was alive, but barely. His skin burned with fever. His clothes clung to him like old rags, soaked in sweat and melting snow from a spilled bucket. His lips were cracked. His fingers twitching. Willard scooped him into his arms with the gentleness of a father, and tears spilled down his face. "I got you now, son." The crowd outside gasped when they saw the boy. The town's doctor, already on the scene thanks to a midwife's quick thinking, took the boy from Willard and called for warm blankets, broth, and space to work. But Elijah didn't pass out. Not yet. With the little strength he had, he reached into the waistband of his threadbare trousers and pulled out a folded piece of yellowed paper, creased a dozen times. He handed it to Pastor Willard. Inside were hand-drawn pictures. Crude, but heartbreakingly clear. One showed a man, tall, angry, holding a whip. Another, a child with a mouth sewn shut. Then, a plate of bones. A dog feasting. And finally, a horse. The only image drawn in color. White. With a golden halo. Willard looked up. His voice broke. "This boy's been telling us. The only way he knew how." Horace tried to speak, tried to deny. But no one listened. Echo stepped forward, planting himself between the boy and the man who'd locked him away. His eyes, cloudy with age, held no fear. Only judgment. Sheriff Harlan didn't need to say a word. He pulled out a pair of iron cuffs, snapped them around Horace's wrists, and led him away in silence. As Horace passed the old horse, Echo let out a final, sharp breath. A breath like a verdict. The trial of Horace Van Colton was the most attended event in Dry Hollow's history. It was held in the town's only courthouse, a building too small for the number of people who showed up. Some stood through the entire proceedings, even in the snow. Others came from neighboring towns, drawn by the scandal, and the strange hero at the center of it all, a half-starved boy and the horse that saved him. Elijah was not asked to speak. He couldn't. But his drawings did. They were displayed on the courtroom wall, enlarged and mounted. The images told a story no child should have to live, but they spoke louder than any testimony. There was outrage. Disgust. But also something else. Grief. And then, hope. The townspeople wept not only for Elijah, but for how blind they had been. For trusting a man just because he wore a fine coat and smiled with his teeth. Horace was found guilty on multiple counts: child neglect, endangerment, falsification of guardianship records, and obstruction of justice. His assets were frozen. His name removed from half the buildings in town. He was sentenced to 20 years in state prison. Some said he aged a decade the moment the verdict came down. He left the courtroom in shackles. And nobody cried for him. Elijah, meanwhile, spent months recovering in the pastor's house, where warmth and soup were always waiting. Though he still couldn't speak, he began to hum, a soft, almost bird-like sound when Echo visited the window. Yes, Echo. The old white horse was allowed to roam free around town, and more than once, Elijah was seen leaning against his side, sketchbook in hand, drawing not just pain, but hope. Children began leaving apples at the church fence for Echo. One morning, Pastor Willard found Elijah standing in the chapel's front yard, holding a small handmade sign. It read, in shaky pencil strokes, He saved me. Beneath it was a drawing of Echo. A year later, the town raised money for a statue. Bronze, tall, and gleaming even in the harsh winter light. It stood at the heart of Dry Hollow Square, a life-size sculpture of Echo, head raised, hooves mid-step, as if forever galloping toward justice. Next to it was a plaque, engraved with Elijah's words. When no one heard me, he listened. When no one came, he ran. Below that, one final line, added by Pastor Willard himself. Sometimes, the most incredible act of humanity comes from an animal. Moral of the story. This story reminds us that cruelty often hides behind wealth and respectability, and that silence does not mean absence. It teaches us that real strength sometimes comes from the smallest, weakest places. And that compassion doesn't always speak with words. Sometimes, it gallops. Sometimes, it waits quietly in a barn. Sometimes, it changes the world.